Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Darko.Audio podcast. This is going out on YouTube, but also on audio podcast platforms. And once again, I am joined by 6 Moons' Srajan Ebaen, and we're talking about relatively recent news items. So new products coming to market in the hi-fi space. But it's not just that, because what we're trying to do, we're trying to go a little bit deeper and pull the curtain back on either technical issues or even, I guess, issues as publishers or writers of or about audio. So we're trying to kind of give you more than just, here's something new, here's what it is, and here's how much it costs. And in fact, I think Srajan's first item in this episode is what we might call a humdinger, because I think it's unbelievably interesting, and I think it will be interesting to you if you think that the ultimate goal of an amplifier or a DAC is to get its total harmonic distortion as low as possible, because Srajan explains why that can be exceptionally misleading. And even if you only watch the first 30 minutes of this podcast or listen to the first 30 minutes of this podcast, you'll get most of it. But if you don't listen all the way to the end, you'll miss out on a new affordable item that allows us to cross over a pair of stand mount speakers or floor setting speakers with a subwoofer, but without a smart amplifier. And I think that's also very interesting. So yeah, let's get started.
This episode is brought to you by Munich High-End, the world's leading international audio show, running May 9 through 12 at the MOC.
So Srajan, welcome back to another episode of the Darko.Audio podcast. How are you?
Thanks, John. I'm good.
Now, today we're going to do what we've roughly been doing for the last little while, is talk about news items in the hi-fi world, but also dig deeper under the hood, maybe pull out some educational elements to them, right? I know that you've got some big ones lined up for today, and I less so. So let's get straight into it. You're going to talk us through a news item that relates to a theoretical topic?
Well, first, what I'd like to do, spend just 2 minutes relative to the last podcast we did, because I learned a few things and I recognized I made one grievous error that I would like to correct.
Please do.
Remember how we talked about isobaric speakers and we couldn't really name a whole lot of brands that did them?
Yes.
Okay, there's a new isobaric speaker that was just introduced, which is not from the UK, but the colonies in the US. Genesis Audio. It's the G7 Foxtrot.
Okay.
And the Genesis like to do amplified bass.
Okay.
And they have a control loop. So it's like sort of motion or feedback controlled. This one is passive. And in order to get similar kind of bass from a passive speaker that they get from their actives, they opted for an isobaric alignment, so dual 8s.
Okay.
There ends that bit of news.
That's not an error, though. That's just what I would call a mild omission. I must add also, I'm back in Berlin. I've got the window open so that my camera doesn't overheat. And you're going to hear sirens because I live one street over from Friedrichstrasse, which is now the main route for all emergency vehicles, much to my frustration. Anyway, yes, next correction, Srajan?
Remember how we talked about active speakers, and we were wondering whether there are any that use Class AB all across, tweeter, mid-range, and woofer. Okay. And we thought there probably would be, but much to my dismay, I've been in the actual factory where they make them. Goldmund in Switzerland. And they just introduced 3 new ones. And we won't get into them because the pricing starts at 80K and goes to 200K. But Goldmund make very wide bandwidth Class AB amplifiers. Right. And all of their active speakers use them top to bottom or bottom to top. No Class D whatsoever. Okay, that crosses off that item. Okay. We were talking about amplifiers in Class B. And unlike way in the past, we couldn't really come up with any contemporary examples. Well, just today, I found out about a new one. And strangely enough, it's a headphone amplifier by Austrian Audio.
Okay,
and it's
I know
a
the brand.
headphone amplifier that goes out to 2 megahertz. So very, very high slew rates, very, very, very fast amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a Class B output stage. Back to isobaric, by the way. There's even headphones that have isobaric drivers.
No
by
way.
FiiO Torino from
Okay.
Italy. And finally, and this was my mistake, when we were talking about electrostats, I mentioned headphones, and then I mentioned speakers, and I referred to Martin Logan, and I completely forgot about the granddaddy of them all, Quad. So with due apologies to Quad, there we are.
Yeah, I did see that in the comments, somebody grumbling about, I can't believe you didn't mention. This is one of the things that happens on YouTube, Srajan. No matter what you do, no matter how thorough you are, there will always be somebody with the indignation and a comment that goes, I can't believe you didn't mention blah, blah, blah. So I would say that what we're talking about here isn't really aimed at advanced users, right? We can't be the advanced level technicians that many, I guess, electrical engineers might want us to be. We're talking maybe just beyond beginner level. I think that's where we're trying to pitch. Not absolute beginners, but this is where I'm trying to pitch normally, just beyond beginner and as far into power use as I can go. But if that triggers the the indignation in you, like, I can't believe you didn't mention, I can't believe you don't know about, too bad, sorry. Like, if we don't mention it, then this probably isn't the podcast or the channel for you. And that's the way I have to look at it, because you could drive yourself crazy, Srajan, as you probably have done, compiling that list of errata, just trying to cover off all the bits that people couldn't believe that you didn't mention. I mean, Quad haven't made an electric static loudspeaker for years, right?
Well, there's a Kern one. It's just Quad is no longer. Yeah, Quad is no longer owned by Quad, but by IAD. So now it's a Chinese.
Yeah, IAG. Yes, IAG.
Yeah, but they still make electrostats. Yes.
Do they really? What, fully electrostatic speakers, like the whole thing?
Panels.
I had no idea they did that.
Marjo and Hank on my staff reviewed them, which granted was a few years ago. So if they have stopped production since then I stand corrected. But until a few years ago, they had completely current electrostatic loudspeakers.
Well, to get you off the hook here, I still think that Martin Logan is the bigger name in electrostats. I mean, Quad may have been the first, but Martin Logan is probably the most contemporary, well-known brand in that space, right? Anyway, okay. Right,
now onto today's matter.
Okay.
And I want to start out by using a dirty word. Do we have to be PG-13 on this program?
It's probably best to do so, if only to appease the YouTube algorithm. I mean, otherwise, if I swear, I'll go and bleep it out. But I'm only editing a 20-minute video normally. But this could go out to 2 hours, Srajan. I don't know. So I don't want to try and hunt and peck for that. I mean, I know that you won't drop the F-bomb. So
no, I won't do that. No, this word starts with a D. Damn distortion.
Distortion is damn distortion. No, damn is okay.
So there's different kinds of distortion. And I would include, for example, things like a ground loop hum or a transformer humming. But that's not distortion that's in the signal. That's something that we add extraneously.
Yes.
When we talk about distortion that's embedded in the signal, one of the ones that I want to talk about today is THD, total harmonic distortion. And there's a lot of people that believe that the lowest number next to the THD spec on an electronic component is the thing to pursue. So if it's 0.0007% THD, that must be a lot better than, for example, a tube amplifier that may show 2%. And it might even show 5 or 10% at full power. So those kinds of people immediately believe that obviously the tube amplifier is broken. It's a distortion generator, and this very, very low distortion device must be oodles better. And I want to talk just about some very basics about what total harmonic distortion is, and that it's not just that little number with the many zeros, but that it's the distribution of said distortion. Now, when we are talking about harmonic distortion, do you know what harmonics are? And if you do, how would you describe them? And what would be an example where a layman who's not a musician has come across harmonics?
So the way that I learnt this topic, and it was only maybe 10 years ago or so, was that basically if a piano plays a certain note and a guitar plays the same note, they won't sound the same, right? Even though they're playing the same note. And that's because of the harmonic distortion, if you like, the harmonics that follow that note on each of the instruments, because they are physically very different, even though with a guitar and a piano, technically they're stringed instruments. So the distortion is the frequencies that play above the fundamental. So let's say that, excuse me for not knowing what a 1 kilohertz tone is as a musical note, if there is such a thing. But if they play a 1 kilohertz tone, there might be some information that plays at 2. There'll be some that might play at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and so it goes out, right? And I generally know that, so the 2 kilohertz, the 4 kilohertz, the 6, that's called even order distortion. And then, like maths, and then you've got the 3, the 5, the 7, the 9 is odd order distortion. And those distortions are what we might loosely call tone or tone color or timbre of a note, of a sound, right? Do I have that right?
Yes, you're rather close, but we have to first remove the word distortion, because when it occurs with an instrument or a voice, it's not distortion. It's that
harmonics.
It's just the harmonics. And the word harmonics already gives us a hint, because the harmonics play harmony to the soloist. The soloist would be the fundamental, the ground note. Mm-hmm. And then what occurs in harmonies above it are the harmonics.
Okay,
now,
but
the average person would have come across at least the second, maybe the third harmonic, if you take an empty bottle and you blow on it, right? It makes a tone, which is the resonant frequency of that enclosed air volume. Now, if you blow faster, you make a higher tone, and that higher tone is the second harmonic. It's an octave above the fundamental. And if you blow even higher, you're going to get to the third harmonic, which is an open fifth, a perfect fifth, above the second. Now, you can do the same with that children's tool, which is called a whirly tube. It's a rubber tube that's quite soft. It's open on both ends, and you just sort of whirl it around your head, and it makes a tone.
Okay.
And as you whirl it faster, you get to the second harmonic, the first overtone, and so on. So that we don't call distortion, because that occurs naturally. We call it distortion if our electronics add more than is recorded. They add their own fingerprint atop the recorded signal. And that's why we call it total harmonic distortion.
So if an instrument does it, it's harmonics. And it's built into the instrument itself, right? It's what that instrument was almost designed to sound like, right, when playing those.
Plus what the player may add. For example, I used to play the clarinet. And there's something called embouchure, which is like the pressure of your lips, the mouthpiece, and then the resonant area in your body, which can go all the way down into the diaphragm. So if I give you a clarinet and I give the same clarinet to 3 other players, and each of them plays the same tone, same instrument, same reed, they will still sound different because of the resonant volume, the different kind of lip pressure, the different kind of airspeed that each player will introduce. So all of those together add to the harmonic spectrum.
Yes.
And that's how we can recognize a David Sanborn from some other famous saxophone player. I mean, within the first 3 or 4 seconds, if you are attuned to a saxophone, that's David Sanborn, because he has a very particular, like you said, timbre. And timbre we might also replace with tone color, which is different from a sine wave, which a computer might generate as a test tone. The sine wave has no overtones whatsoever.
Correct. So we're talking about intended harmonics, which I won't call distortion, versus, well, I won't say they're necessarily unwanted in our electronics, but technically they're unwanted. And that is distortion, right? But it's not, it might have been intended by the designer of, let's say, an amplifier, maybe, a bit like an instrument, right? Is that where it gets a bit hazy? I don't know.
I would put it this way. and this is only according to what engineers have told me, at the moment I ask engineers a question, by my question, they realize my very low level of understanding, and so they immediately dumb down their answer. So whatever I now convey is like very, very low level. But my understanding is that it's virtually impossible to design electronics without any harmonic distortion. And we're now going to get to the different mechanisms.
Right.
What I was told, that if you want to apply feedback in an amplifier, negative feedback to reduce the total harmonic distortion, you need a whole lot of gain. For example, if you need 30 dB of voltage gain for the circuit to play loud enough, and you want to apply 70 or 80 dB of negative feedback, you need to generate 110 dB of gain because the feedback will subtract it, right?
Okay.
And in order to actually come up with 110 dB of gain, like a phono stage has very high gain, you may need multiple gain stages. And the more of those gain stages you sync up in series, you cascade them, the more the distortion shifts from the low ones, the second, third, and fourth, and fifth, and it will go up. Each time you add a gain stage, the harmonic distortion will push into the higher levels. And now we will talk higher orders. And now we will talk about why that is not necessarily a good thing.
Okay.
And I sent you a picture to put behind us so that our viewers can see it. Unfortunately, the ones that are listening won't be able to see it.
Correct. They won't be able to see that.
If we take a C major chord, in the Western scale, and we look at those harmonics that belong into the chord, we find out that the even order harmonics all fall into the C major chord by being either C, E, or G. So the second harmonic is an octave. The fourth harmonic is an octave. The sixth harmonic is the fifth. The eighth harmonic is another octave. Even the 16th harmonic is another octave. So octaves and fifths and even thirds all belong, they're identical to the notes that comprise a C major chord.
Okay.
So there's no problem if we have some extras, and if they occur an octave above, they don't seem out of place. They don't create any dissonance. Now, the third and the fifth harmonic occur at a fifth and a third. So those two also belong. But now by the time we get to the seventh harmonic and above, now we're hitting notes that don't belong, that create friction, dissonance. In jazz, they will call them a blue note. So if I add a B flat to a C major chord, I have a little bit of rubbing going on, very deliberate. It creates this sort of blue tinge. And that's why odd order harmonic distortion above the fifths becomes more and more objectionable. Because now you are throwing in full tones and half tones into a chord that where they don't belong. And we're talking very simplified right now because we are only considering what happens if you play a single note at a time, like a solo singer. Now, the moment you have multiple instruments and you have harmonies and you have melodies that go chromatically across the harmony, you might have 10 or 12 sounds at the same time. And each of those sounds has the harmonics stacked on top. And if now onto those harmonics you add harmonics that don't belong, and you do that by virtue of your electronics, you change the harmonic envelope of what's recorded.
Right. So
and for example, if a tube amplifier on a guitar amp is deliberately driven into distortion, and it gets that screechy kind of sound that the guitarist wants, that's high order, odd order harmonics. 13s, 15s, way out there. That's what gives it that sort of gnarly kind of sound.
I had no idea about that. Okay, that's interesting. That's really cool.
And for example, a muted trumpet, you know, the trumpet you have to blow in, and you have a long tube that's rolled up. So you need quite a lot of air to create sound. Now, if you put a damper inside, that poor player has to play with even more airspeed to make sure any sound comes out at all. And sometimes you see them puff up their cheeks and they get really red on the face because they exert that much pressure. A muted trumpet has harmonics that go way out.
Right.
They go way out past 60 or 70 kilohertz in frequency. And that's why a muted trumpet has a very particular kind of strident sound. If, for example, a singer strains their voice, because either they sing too high or they sing louder than they should, they introduce more upper harmonics as well.
Okay.
And when somebody is hoarse, and you can hear the main sound that they make, but then there is another sound inside of it that sort of stands out like a second or sometimes even a third note, voila, again, you're hearing harmonics that person usually doesn't produce.
Right.
So now we've established that the even order harmonics, the second, the fourth, the sixth, and so on, they're benign because they occur they don't rub, but they create richness. So, for example, if you have a woman singing a natural tone in her natural register, and now you add a man that sings the same tone in his natural register, he will automatically be an octave lower. And then if you take a 10-year-old child and have them sing the same note in their natural register, it will be an octave higher. And so now you have the same sound across 3 octaves. And that creates richness. So as we take second and fourth and eighth order harmonic distortion, which are all octaves above the fundamental, we add richness. And if we do a lot of that, like a tube amp might, we get a really sort of fulsome, thick, dense, fat sound. Now, if we take a high feedback Class D amplifier that has extremely low distortion, but we look at the distortion spectrum, and we see that it has distortion way past the 16s at very minute levels, but there it is. That distortion is far more objectionable than the low order second or even third, fourth, and fifth harmonic.
So hang on, let me just recap here because this is important, right? So you're saying that a tube amp might be heavy on distortion, but because its makeup is mainly even order, so second, fourth, and you've said eighth as well, that to us sounds like additional richness and fullness and maybe a bit of cream in a coffee, like that kind of thing.
Correct.
Whereas if you've got, it doesn't even have to be a Class D amp, does it?
No, it doesn't.
But I understand why you necessarily say that. But let's say a solid state amplifier, and let's say the design, like you say, has got the total distortion way down by using lots of negative feedback, but that distortion profile is mainly comprising a fairly low level, high odd order. So let's say 17th, I don't know whether there's a 15th or a 19th or whatever, but just to kind of make the point, it could still be low level, but it's because of where it is, it's really, it's uncomfortable to listen to, or could be, right?
Yes, it sounds like dirt or rust. It has a metallic tinge. And now we need to make an important point. And that is that we said the second and the fourth and the third and the fifth, they're all benign. But
so
they have
whoa. But so low level, odd order. So we already established the low level, even order is fuller, richer, creamier. And now you're saying that low level, even order, so third and fifth, is also not objectionable, but it's going to sound different though, right? Isn't it?
It will sound different. That's the thing.
Right.
If you add a fifth, and then if you add a third, the third is the harmony. If you just have 2 singers and one sings solo and the other one sings a harmony backup, usually they use the third.
Okay.
That sings above the soloist. Sometimes they use the fifth. And when you do that, you add a little bit of freshness.
Okay.
So if we call the second and fourth order harmonic distortion maybe cream, or we call it maybe pastel colors, then the third and the fifth would be more neon colored. They add just a little bit of sort of freshness or a little bit of spice. And what I learned from Nelson Pass, who obviously runs Pass Lab, but he also runs First Watt.
Yes.
He and his companions have looked at the sales figures of their amplifiers. And they have 2 different flavors of amplifiers. They have amplifiers with a predominant second order harmonic distortion, and they have amplifiers with a predominantly third order harmonic distortion. And they make sure that they don't really have anything above the fifth.
Okay.
So it's either the second and the fourth, even order, or the third and the fifth, odd order. The sales are about 50-50, which means that there's about an equal amount of people that prefer the richer, creamier flavor of the second and fourth, the even order. And there's people like me who started out preferring the second order, and I've now switched to the dark side, and I now prefer the third and the fifth odd order effect, which is a little bit more separated, and it is a little bit more energetic, and it's maybe just a little bit more brisk in the treble. Now, all of this depends on how much of the third and the fifth we have. We're not talking about 10 or 20%. We're just talking about a little bit. And we should now also add that the distortion spectrum, the intensity of those harmonics, will change according to level. So if we stress an amplifier by playing it pretty much to the max, that amplifier has to work harder. The harmonic distortion spectrum will change. It's not that which harmonics it triggers change, but the amount, by how much maybe the fifth goes up, by how much the seventh goes up. So as we play a system really loud, if it's not a very good system, or if we are running out of steam too soon for our loudness, we often notice that it starts to sound just a little bit objectionable.
Edgy. Yeah.
We turn it back down and voila, now it sounds right again. And what just happened is that we reduced the harmonic distortion that we forced the system to put out.
You used a word a few moments ago that many of us would ascribe to certain amplifiers that we've heard down the years, and that is metallic. Like some amplifiers have that sort of metallic tinge to them. And I think what you're saying is that suggests higher doses of higher odd order distortion.
That's correct.
Right. But the thing is, if you're looking at a single THD figure, you're not going to know what the profile is, right?
No, you won't.
Even if it's really low, it could be deceptively low because what is there could be all that higher order unpleasant stuff. Now, what's interesting here is that in the 70s and maybe the early 80s, the Japanese, a lot of other amplifier companies were engaged in THD spec sheet wars, right? So they were all trying to sell their amps on the lowest THD specification possible. And that sort of died away. But it's come back with a vengeance. But it's not manufacturers who are engaging in this now. It's sort of everyday consumers who want to. I'm not overestimating this here. Who want to berate other people for their choices. Oh, you use an amplifier that's got this much THD or that much THD. Mine's got super low THD. You're an idiot, right? So it's moved from the manufacturer realm to the consumer realm, and I think those people that using anything to berate any other audiophile or hi-fi enthusiast online is objectionable in and of itself. But their complaint is, it's almost baseless, because let's say somebody does enjoy an amplifier that has, 0.5% THD. If that's predominantly second and fourth, happy days. And if the complainer has got 0.1 THD, but theirs is predominantly 13th and 15th, I know which amplifier I would prefer, but unfortunately, the measurements we get out on the internet don't tell us the profile of the distortion, just all of it sort of summed together. This is how much it is in total, right? And I think a lot of people, especially newcomers, especially those on low budgets, look at, this thing has got 0.001% THD, and that's way lower than that way more expensive amplifier over there. The people buying that expensive one must be absolute morons, right? This is the oversimplistic thinking of not knowing what you don't know. And I think you've just, Srajan, pulled back the covers very eloquently on the possibilities of what we don't know that are hiding under that THD spec. I mean, it's not called THD out on the internet. Now it's called SINAD, which is like a combination of signal to noise ratio and THD. But it's the same kind of thing, right?
It is.
So I think anybody pursuing low THD for the sake of low THD is making a mistake, or possibly making a mistake.
the reason that I wanted to bring up this topic is to actually introduce a new product. And I use that as an excuse to hang the THD topic on.
Okay.
And this new product is from Sicily, and it's by a company called Darko.Audio. And they have a new range called the Masterpiece series. And this is a tube audio company, has been for a long time. The Masterpiece range now is their new, the best that we know how to make kind of thing. And interestingly enough, in that range, they only use two tubes. They use the 211, which is a very large, hot-running, direct-heated transmitter triode, and they use the KT170. And they only use single-ended Class A. Class A, obviously, by design has to be. I mean, single-ended has to be Class A. And they use it either in single tube or in parallel single-ended tube configuration. So the power goes from 20 watts a side to 40 watts a side. I just recently reviewed their new Tektron Neptune 211 integrated, which makes 19 watts. And it's a very simple circuit with absolutely zero feedback whatsoever. So you expect, and you get, second and fourth order harmonic distortion more than you would on a solid state amplifier, unless it was specifically tuned for that. And on certain speakers, it was too much. Speakers that were inherently rich, like my IQ speakers from Darko.Audio in Poland, because they're dipoles down to 300, and the dipole radiates front and back. You get a little bit of room echo that already adds a little bit of sort of flexibility, and it adds a little bit of billowiness and richness. So on that speaker, that tube amplifier's THD profile, for my taste, overdid things. But then I pulled out an old Italian speaker that is using old Accutone ceramic drivers. And especially the old Accutone drivers, these really hard ceramic drivers, they always had a reputation for being a little bit grayish, a little bit monochromatic, sort of precise on the attack, but a little sort of damped and dull on the sustain and the bloom. You put that kind of an amplifier in front of it, and the sun shines. It was brilliant. It sounded much better than my solid state amplifier on those speakers.
Okay.
So again, if it is true that it's virtually impossible to design electronics, especially amplifiers, with zero THD whatsoever, then we must be mindful that the THD profile of the amplifier that we buy matches our taste, especially in conjunction with the speaker that we want to buy. Those two have to sort of match. And it's not just a match on impedance, and it's not just a match on having sufficient power, but it's also a match on the total harmonic distortion and how that behaves at the volume levels that we like to listen to.
But I don't know anybody on the internet providing distortion profile information. Plenty of people provide THD or cyanide or whatever. That's everywhere. But it's interesting because I know that there are a lot of people out on the internet who love the sound of topping DACs. And I do for the money, they're fine. But they do have that kind of neon blue note, kind of abrasive edge to them. It's not even an edge. It's just, it sounds too cool. And it doesn't have the fullness and the richness. So I think they are low in second and fourth, and maybe a bit higher in third and fifth. I'm guessing here. But that, to use what you've just explained to try and ascribe qualities to topping DACs. I mean, I know we're not talking amplifiers, but they still have analog output stages. And I know that those DACs are designed by topping absolutely now to have the lowest possible, THD or cyanide score available, because they know that's what people are looking for. Well, some people are looking for on the internet, but those people haven't been exposed to what you've just explained, Srajan, and I think they probably should be. But I know that whatever we say over here is probably not going to influence that kind of thinker, because the topping DAC is like $100 or $200. Anyway, I get off my horse about this now. It's just
the way Nelson Pass explained it to me is that when we look at very low distortion circuits, we need to look at the means that they pursued to enable those
Right.
low distortion values. And if it's an awful amount of THD, negative feedback, with plenty of gain stages in series, we can pretty much predict what will happen. So he said it's the means. It's not the fact that they achieve low distortion. He said, wonderful, low distortion is a good thing to pursue. But the means can sometimes be, what's the saying, when the cure is worse than the disease?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
It's a little bit like that.
Okay. But this information isn't available to any consumer, not at all. Like, how many gain stages do you have? Well, you might if you dig a little bit, but I don't think many manufacturers are supplying that kind of information or telling you how much negative feedback they've applied or any of that kind of stuff. And that needs to be known, as you say, if you're to work out whether the distortion profile of that amp or DAC or whatever is going to suit your system or your ears.
You have to ask those questions. That's correct.
Right. All right, let's move on. Srajan, do you know what the most popular physical format was in the USA last year? Music format.
Well, it's going to have to be between the LP and the CD. But
yes, this is by units shifted, so sales numbers. Take a guess.
Between the two, and knowing that you're asking the question, I'm going for LP.
It was for the first time ever for the first time since the 90s, right? So I think it's well known that the LP is extremely popular again. That's been done to death. CDs are not dying away yet. Do you know what the third most popular physical format was in the USA last year?
I didn't know that we had a third, but now that you pointed out,
we do.
Reel-to-reel tape is making a comeback, but I think that is really marginal. I think the cassette tape is making a comeback, but that can't be big enough yet to count.
It is. It actually is. Yeah, it's the third most popular physical format available now because there isn't really anything else, is there? I mean, like you say, reel-to-reel, mini disc, DDCs, I don't even know what else, like Blu-ray audio, but these are tiny. So in the USA last year, 500,000 cassettes were sold, pre-recorded cassettes, right? So
how big is the catalog? How many titles can you get on?
I don't know, but I do know that the most popular titles come from obviously Taylor Swift, because Taylor Swift is just a whirlwind. The Guardians of the Galaxy movie soundtracks, because they often pull from songs of the past, and they're good fun. So it's very much a format that is no longer appealing to old men like you and I, Srajan. It's really a young person's format because the young people that are into it now probably weren't there the first time around. And the difficulty I see with it growing any further is getting playback devices, right? To get something to listen to your cassette on. Because there are plenty of like secondhand cassette decks around, but who knows how much repair or how much love they need to bring them back up to almost as new quality. Anyway, what's interesting this year, and I did tease this maybe in a previous episode, I don't remember, but FiiO, the Chinese company who we've spoken about a lot and who introduced a mechanical keyboard 2 months ago that has a headphone amp and DAC inside, totally bonkers, but wonderful. FiiO are pushing the bonkers envelope even further with the introduction of something called the CP13, which is a portable cassette player. So it's like an old Walkman, but you can't use the term Walkman, or not officially anyway. They can't use it because they don't own the rights to it because Sony do. But this is just a simple cassette player, and it's rechargeable. Because did you ever have a Walkman, Srajan, years ago, like for cassette tapes?
No, I started out with the iPod. That was my first sort of portable source.
So from about 86 to 2000, I had a portable cassette player of some type. And my biggest bugbear was, recharging batteries to put back in it because I didn't want to buy new batteries. Because back in the early 90s and late 80s, a 4-pack of Duracell, or what was the other one that was kind of like the rival? I can't remember now. They were expensive, man. Like it used to drive me crazy. Anyway, so this FiiO CP13 Walkman, I won't call it a Walkman, but it is a Walkman, rechargeable. It has a 3.5mm headphone socket, which gives us 250 millivolt output, which is not earth-shattering, but it'll be enough for your average 32 ohm headphone, earbuds, that kind of thing. There's no recording, there's no Bluetooth. And it sells for an entirely reasonable 119 euros. So if you want to know how good it is or isn't, you can just buy one, try it. And I think they might have sold out of the first production run. Don't quote me on that, but I'm guessing because I tried to buy one the other day. Couldn't find one anywhere. Couldn't find one.
Now, I assume the one thing it can't do is record, correct?
Yeah, no recording. So it can't record, but it obviously can play back cassette tapes. I think it's a smart move. I think they could sell quite a few of these. Anyway, so that's one element of portable audio. Going completely the other end, to the high end of portable audio, we've got a new portable... Oh, your cat is back. Is it food time? It's like clockwork.
Indeed it is. 15 minutes early you are.
Okay. So Astell and Kern, we know as probably one of the most... Yeah, your cat.
I think I'm going to have... Can we just interrupt it?
We can interrupt, yeah, for sure.
Sorry for that.
No problem. That's funny.
I pawned him off to Yvette.
No, it's fine. So Astell and Kern from South Korea have introduced a new sort of co-flagship digital audio player. So you put an SD card in the bottom, but you can also install streaming apps, not from the Google Play Store, but from Astell and Kern's white list of apps. And you can also use it as a Roon-ready endpoint. Now, I'm talking about the SP3000. There's now something called the SP3000T, which uses I'll give you the boring stuff here. The decoding is done by an AKM chip. It's the AK4499EX. Interestingly, what they've done with this is they've put another chip before that to try and strip out some of the noise and the jitter. And then on outputs, we get 2.5 mil balanced, 4.4 millimeter balanced, 3.5 mil single-ended. But here's the twist. So this SP3000T, so the T at the end, stands for tube. So there's a tube inside, but it's not your kind of normal sort of size tube. It's like a very slender finger tube. It's not the Korg new tube either. I know they have done a model with one of those in there, but this is, I've got to read this off my notes here. This is a Raytheon Jan 6418 mil-spec tube, and they can be switched in and out of the playback circuit. So you don't have to always have them on. So basically with this portable player, you can have 3 modes of operation. You've obviously got tube mode, and then you've got op-amp mode, which would be the other output driver if you're not using the tubes. And then there's a hybrid mode that uses the kind of the two together. So, I mean, maybe they're chasing industry trends here, because it does seem to be that lots of manufacturers now are producing portable audio devices with tubes built in. Kern have a DAC like this. THD have a little dongle DAC now with a little tube in. I think the big challenge, as you probably know this better than I do, is microphony. So if you vibrate a tube, it will make a sound through your headphones. So that vibration will turn into electrical charge, a bit like when you bang the cable on your headphone cables. So I don't know what they've done to sort of combat that. Maybe they've got it sort of floating. I just don't know. But I don't think many people are going to buy one of these because they go for $3,000 US. But it's an alternative take on the SP3000, which has been out for a year already. I have one. I really like it, but there's 2 things that bug me about it. Number one is the Roon Arc app isn't the same as I have on my phone, and its downloads are still too slow. Number 2, I really wish, and I'm going to bug them about this again in Munich this year, I really wish they would whitelist PlexAmp, because PlexAmp is the thing I use when I'm not using Roon Arc. I think many people are going to be very into PlexAmp this year. It's a bit like an alternative to Roon. It's cheaper. It's not as powerful, but it does roughly the same kind of thing. And I just don't know what it takes for a manufacturer like Astell and Kern and their software team to offer an app as a whitelisted, downloadable, installable option, because obviously there's no Google Play Store. So, yeah, those are 2 items from either end of the wallet spectrum in the portable audio space.
And to connect to my piece before yours, we can quite confidently assume that on the Astell and Kern, that if you engage the tubes, you change the harmonic distortion profile, and you're going to deliberately add some of that second maybe even fourth order distortion, and that when you mix and match them, you get some of what the op amp is doing, which should be much, much lower in distortion, but could potentially have a little bit of the higher order distortion. And then you overlay it with the even order distortion from the tube. And it becomes a seasoning device.
Right. So you get 3 flavors from one device in this one, which I think is good because people like options. I mean, I know I'm always torn on this one, Srajan, because sometimes I just think, well, this is just too much for the tweakers. But on the other hand, I played with my buddy Alessandro's K-In tube DAP a couple of months ago. Really heavy, very expensive, sounded utterly fantastic. Oh my God, it sounded so good. But I would, I don't know whether I would carry something that big and bulky with me, but I'm not necessarily the user for that particular kind of product. I know there are plenty of people out there who do have the money and they do have the pocket size and the strength of material in their pocket to support it all day, because that's what they want, and they're prepared to spend several $1,000s on that kind of thing instead of having speakers and amp at home. That is their entire audio system plus earphones or headphones. So I just think it's interesting for some people, but not for everybody.
Well, now I'm going to go to my next topic, and we're back on distortion. Okay. But this time we're about room acoustics. Okay. And you have a lot of experience with it because you have actually installed or had installed professional room treatments with the before and after measurements to show your audience what they actually do. And you can probably confirm that below maybe 150, certainly below 100 hertz, the kind of room treatments that you opted for are either not effective whatsoever or only marginally so, whereas above, they become more and more effective. And if you can say yes to that, then my next question to you would be, well, can we use DSP to do anything about that low bass up to the upper bass region?
So very quickly, there's something called the Schroeder frequency, which is roughly around 100 to 200 hertz, depending upon your room dimensions. But that's where the room's behavior transforms from resonance or resonant behavior in the bass to reflective behavior in the mid-range of the treble. And I've spoken a hell of a lot, to the point of probably annoyance of my audience, about the reflective behavior. So the reverberation, right? And that the stuff you can see around me here, that's all tackling reverberation. But below the Schroeder frequency, so in the bass region, I've got a couple of bass traps here, but they don't really do very much. I still have a bass problem in this room at about 35 hertz. Now, I can tackle that to some degree with something like Dirac or Room Perfect, especially if, in my case, it's a peak, right? So I've got this mode, and software is really good at bringing down a mode, but it's not as effective, or it's not as easy to be as effective in filling a null, because if you try and push more energy to fill that null, all you do is create a deeper null. That's the way I roughly understand it. So it's very difficult to completely solve bass problems in a room unless you load in huge, enormous bass traps, like just a ridiculous amount of volume, of size. I won't have it. We've spoken about this before. I won't do it in here. I'll have all of this, but I will not have the bass traps that are required to solve the bass problem in this room. In Portugal, I have fewer bass problems, so I don't really have to think about it too much there, although Dirac can make a difference, especially when you're tying together subs as well. But that's not what you're asking about. I think you're asking about what is it? Well, is your question, what can DSP do and what can it not do?
Correct.
So DSP can do bugger all about the stuff that happens above the Schroeder frequency in terms of reflections, because once the sound's out of the speaker, it's snookering around the room. You can't do anything about that. There is a Dirac thing coming that uses more than 2 speakers, so maybe 4, maybe 8, that apparently can tackle that reverberation. But for most of us, we've got 2 speakers, right? This is a stereo channel, Srajan.
Right.
2 speakers plus software. You can't really do... I don't want to say you can't tackle time domain problems with software, because I believe they can tackle some time domain problems, especially those that exist in the speaker or are related to speaker position or speaker offset. But with room reflections, if you've got a reflective room, no amount of Dirac or Room Perfect is really going to help you any more than, say, a scintilla. So to recap, it's great at bass, not very effective in the mid-range and treble.
So if I translate this into my own words and understanding, then, and I've tried this myself with DSP, DSP can very easily hack off the peaks.
Yes.
So our bass becomes more linear.
At the listening position. We must say at the listening position. Because it varies around the room.
Of course.
We're sort of focusing on that sort of sphere around us when we're sat listening, right?
But what we have not changed the radiation of the bass. It still is omnidirectional. It still bounces off our front wall, the floor, the ceiling, the side walls. So the time domain issue, that all of those reflections arrive at our ears slightly late, even though now at correct amplitude, that we have not fixed in DSP. And like you said, in order to do that, we would need very, very large volume room treatments. Either big traps in the corners or the entire ceiling basically stuffed with absorptive materials, like the proverbial mattress bolted to the ceiling.
So every recording studio, pretty much, that I've ever been in, is essentially a room within a room. So the walls, you can't lean on them because there's like a layer of sort of polythene in some of them, and then there's like an enormous bass trap behind that, and then there's the normal wall, right? So they are purpose-built to deal with all the bass from the outset. Now, I know that most people think I'm crazy doing all of this, but you know, when you're building a recording studio, it's another world of crazy. But then again, that's not your living room, is it? So it's a bit different, and it's a purpose-built room for audio, which is why I've kind of gone the halfway here, because it's still my working space. But generally, for most people with average rooms, doing this is madness or impossible, or their wife won't let them, or their husband won't let them, or whoever they want to throw under the bus won't let them, or they don't like the look of it or whatever. So it's really hard to tackle room problems without any sort of visual intrusion, as far as I know.
So the second solution for bass problems, besides DSP linearizing the bass by notching out especially peaks, is to not put bass into areas in the room where we don't want it in the first place. And that would be directional bass,
right,
which is called cardioid. And one really prime example is the key speaker that deliberately cancels bass behind the speaker. So if you stand behind it and you play bass, you hardly hear anything. So now we don't have time domain issues because we don't have any bass reflecting off the wall in the first place. But there's only a few cardioid speakers available. The third solution now comes from Switzerland, from a pro audio company called PSI Audio. And they are operating out of Yverdon-les-Bains, the Bath. And Yverdon is the same little town that also hosts Madison Audio, also out of Switzerland. They make like a really, really small, very good DAC. PS Audio have active bass traps.
PSI Audio.
PSI Audio. Yes, not PS Audio. And they now have a new one, which is, it's their digital version. And it contains two, I believe, 5.25-inch drivers. It contains a microphone. It then must contain some digital circuitry because they are talking about low latency. The whole thing, the diameter is less than a foot, and the height is, I believe, 60 centimeters. So it's only about up to the belt line, if that. And it's like a plant stand. It's a pretty compact unit. It does require AC power, so you must plug it in. And then it has two switches, up and down, and therefore the amount of gain that this device creates. So you can dial in more gain and lower gain. You can do it manually, and you can do it with an app. Now, here are the claims. I will review a pair, but I haven't gotten them yet. So all I have right now is the company's claims. What they claim the effect of these active bass traps is like they create a virtual hole in the wall, about 1.5 by 1.5 meters. So if you put a hole in a wall while you're having sound pressure energize the room, that pressure now leaves the room through your holes.
So it's like a black hole for sound.
It's like a black hole for low frequencies from 16 to 150 hertz.
So it's shorter frequency. Yeah, okay, yeah.
And they claim that the potency of this device is up to 45 times its size. In other words, if you wanted to duplicate that with a traditional passive bass trap, you would need 45 of these devices.
Because
and how do they work?
I think it's
now they're clear to say that this is not about out-of-phase cancellation, because many years ago I reviewed something like that, where basically you had a subwoofer in the corner that had a microphone built in, and it would generate out-of-phase information to sort of pretend that your speaker system was cardioid. It canceled the bass that was reflecting back. Apparently, the PSI audio, it's called the AVA, A-V-A-A. This AVA device apparently does not use out-of-phase cancellation.
Okay.
They say that it reduces the acoustic impedance of the air in front of it. And, and because it has a microphone, it responds in real time, something that DSP with just two speakers obviously can't do. DSP can time correct our speaker if our tweeter arrives too early because it's on a flat baffle. It can fix that. And if we have a subwoofer in the corner that sits 3 meters further away from the speakers and it suffers its own digital latency, DSP can correct for that by delaying the signal to the speakers. This now cleans up time domain issues because it actually takes out pressure and bass in the areas where we don't want it, which is behind the speakers. And so they recommend that the most effective areas to position these devices is in the room corners, where usually, because three surfaces meet, most of the pressure builds up.
Is it the corners behind the speakers?
Yes.
So if you have a pair and you're looking at your speakers, you'd put one there and one there?
Yes, and if you want to disguise it, you put a plant on top or a lamp or something, and it will look like an industrial stand. But you won't see any controls on it. You won't see. I believe there might be a light in the front that just shows you it's on, but that's the extent of it.
But it's much, much smaller than a traditional passive bass trap.
Much smaller. In fact, there will be pictures behind our talking heads that show how tall or how short they really are. The price, I believe, is €3,000 for one. And there is an online dealer in Germany called Thomann, with two N at the end, Thomann.de, that sells them. I don't know whether they offer an in-home trial.
They do. Thomann do generally offer an Amazon competitive home demo period, like 30 days or something like that. I think they do. I don't know whether they would do for something like that. That's generally they do, but who knows? But you can, yes, if you're in Europe and you want to get a pair of these and try them out, I think your safest bet is to buy them from Thomann, because that's where you're most likely to get money back guarantee, because this thing won't sell on Amazon. It's not an Amazon type product. Right. But Thomann is normally like a pro audio hardware retailer. There's also a Thomann in the UK. Did you know that?
I bought from them, yeah.
Of course, yes, because you're in Ireland, yeah. I always forget, but like it's just buying from the UK. I don't know whether you have this, but it's become such a pain in the ass now.
Yeah, VAT and delays, it's a big deal, yeah.
It's a first world miserable problem anyway, and you're going to get a pair of these bass traps, Srajan?
Yes. And now we talked about this in the past. I use a cardioid subwoofer, so I don't really have the usual bass problems, but some of the bass energy that the subwoofer puts out towards the front wall, which is less than it puts out towards me, the listener, that's still reflecting. And that still means that whatever is coming back there is delayed in time. And so what I'm expecting primarily, and my review will show whether I'm correct or not, is that these AVA devices from Switzerland will clean up the time domain performance. There will be less or no reflected bass coming back at me. So that time delay should be gone if it works as advertised.
So how do you expect that to manifest in what you hear in the seat?
It's very simple to describe. The bass will be virtually indistinguishable in texture from the mid-range and the treble. Because if we pay attention and we compare what our headphones, if they're good, open back linear headphones, what they sound like compared to our speaker system, we should notice that in the treble and in the upper mid-range, we probably hear very little difference in texture between headphones and speakers. But as we go lower in frequency, starting in the mid-range to the lower mid-range and then the upper bass, we get more, I'm going to call it reverb.
I call it blur. It sounds blurrier, right?
It becomes blurrier, it becomes ringier, it becomes more resonant, and things don't stop on time. They linger. So whereas the mid-range frequencies don't linger. So if I'm now trained, and I have trained myself without knowing it, to being very critical of this discontinuous texture, where the treble and the mid-range are precise, and the lower ranges become more muddy, or they hang over longer because they don't stop in time, that's what I expect to change. Whatever I still have of that sort of ringy quality, I expect that these bass traps will take away, or at least minimize.
I mean, it's certainly, it's expensive, yes. $6,000 for the pair. If you wanted to solve this, assuming they do as described, if you wanted to do that with passive treatments, as we said before, you need a lot of them, lots of physical volume and mass in the room, probably cost you a few grand. I mean, actually, here's something that I need to correct, that I haven't made a mistake, but it's something I've not really made clear, is generally when you're treating a room from top to bottom, you don't do what I've done here. You treat the bass first. So my friend Jesko, he's got a treated studio up in Wedding, and all of his room treatments, they're all bass traps. Every single one of them placed around on the ceiling, in the kind of where the ceiling joins the wall. So he's done it the correct way. So he's fixed the bass, and then by virtue of fixing the bass with so much, removing a lot of the reflective surfaces, you also fix the reverb in the mid-range, the treble, right? That's how you should really do it, which is why purpose-built studios do this anyway. Now, I did not want to load this room with bass traps. I just don't want to do it. So I kind of took the mid-range, the treble route, and thought, well, the bass stuff can wait. I too am meant to be getting a pair of these bass traps, Srajan, but I was a little bit more hesitant than you. I said, look, I'm not going to review them until I've heard and tried them out to see what they can do, because I'm wary. I'm going to say I'm a little bit wary of the claims they're making, but that doesn't mean I'm skeptical or I think it's nonsense. I think it's entirely reasonable. My room is certainly small enough here that it should make a difference, but I wanted to be sure before committing resources to making a video, right?
Right.
But maybe we'll end up just discussing them here, because it could be very interesting, especially if our experiences differ. I don't know. Or it could be just like one of these revelatory experiences, but I don't know, because Hans Beekhuizen has already made a video about these. I don't know whether he was enthusing or not. It was hard for me to work out what he really thought. I think he liked them, but I don't know whether he's going to keep them, or I just don't know. But if they do as they claim, they won't be going back. I will buy them, because that's the last puzzle for me in here, is to solve the bass, as I'm sure it is with your room as well.
Which is why I was presenting this as a topic today, that if it works as claimed in the size rooms that you and I have, normal size rooms, 5x6, 6x8 at the most, this could be a real lifesaver for hobbyist audiophiles that, for the reasons just described, would never consider traditional passive bass traps. Because in a room your size, if you had them standing on the floor, you would lose a lot of floor space. Your room would shrink by a few meters each way.
I've been there and I've done that, and I had all these GIK. I've said this a million times before. I had, was it 6 GIK bass traps in here, and they were, I don't know, like this wide by this tall, and then they were sort of, as we're looking at, this deep. And I got so tired of looking at them, I gave them away in the end. I gave them away to some dude who just came and picked them up, because I just didn't want that level of physical intrusion. I know I've got all of this, but for me, it's much artier than having 6 blocks in your room. So the PSI solution is more expensive for sure, but I think it It's a more elegant solution for those who have that kind of level of income and that inclination to solve the problem that way. Not for everyone, as always, right?
Correct.
All right, let's move on. I've got two news items again here, grouped them together, going to be fairly quick. They are together because one of them, I think, is overcooked in terms of press announcement, press release, because we get a lot of this news, Srajan, from press releases. And the other one, I think, is an undercooked press release. Let's do the overcooked one first.
All right.
Now, this could be a bit spicy. I mean, no malice towards the manufacturer, which is FiiO Acoustics. I just think the press release, maybe I was just having a bad day when I wrote it up about a week or so ago. But FiiO Acoustics have announced a new small floor standing loudspeaker. It's called the M40. The full title is the M40 Powered Micro Tower. It's interesting because it's not a full-size tower loudspeaker, so it's a floor standing speaker that can go into a smaller room like this one. I think it would work very well in here. It's a two-way. Oh, the cabinet is about 71 centimeters tall, I believe. But yeah, two-way, obviously a mid-bass driver, a tweeter. It doesn't tell us what material the tweeter is made of. And I'm used to seeing that in press releases, and I don't know why, but maybe it's not important. I don't know. But these are powered, so they're not active. Now, what that means in this particular case is that the amplifier lives entirely in the primary loudspeaker. And the secondary loudspeaker, we can't call them master and slave anymore because of, how language changes and how things become distasteful. Anyway, so primary speaker has all the amps, secondary speaker, no amps, and they're connected by speaker wire, right? Mm-hmm. So by virtue of when you see speaker wire on powered speakers, you know it's a powered speaker. The amps are over here and they're driving passive crossovers, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why this is not an active speaker. One of the commenters on the channel recently was trying to tell me that I was an idiot for saying that a powered speaker was not active, but it's not active because the crossover needs no power to work. It's made of passive components. That's why it's called passive. Anyway, so you've got these passive crossovers. It's like having your normal speaker amp, but just put into a smaller package and then put inside the speaker cabinet, right? Mm-hmm. That's what a powered speaker is. Okay, so this is where things get a bit spicy. The press release had body text, and then right at the bottom, there was like a little bulleted spec sheet list, right? So in the body text, it says that the amplifier is 100 watts per channel, right? But then you look down the bottom and you realize that that's peak power. So that's not the power that the amplifier can consistently deliver. It's just in extremely short bursts. Because if it was
0.2 seconds, possibly.
Could be that. It could be something as low as that, right? So we look down at the sort of bulleted spec list at the bottom, and the RMS power, so the constant delivery power, is 50 watts per channel, right? So, like, why would they say it's 100 when it's actually 50? But it gets worse than that because
it's into 6 ohms?
4 ohms. 50 watts per channel into 4 ohms. There's no shame in any of this, but it's just the way they tried to dress it up. Now, usually the industry standard for an amplifier rating, yes, they give you the 4 ohm, but that's not the main one. The 8 ohm rating is the main one. It's the main dish, right? So if we've got 50 watts into 4 ohms, chances are we probably got 25 to 30 into 8, somewhere in that ballpark. I think it's a Class D amp, pretty sure it is. So why not just say it's a 25 or 30 watt per channel amplifier in that speaker? And it's probably because it would put people off. But that's the truth of the matter. And it took me, an idiot, just to scroll down and go, oh, it's that. Now, maybe I misread with the press release. I apologize to FiiO Acoustics if I did, but I don't think I did. But then also, there's a DAC inside this pair of speakers. So you've got USB input, Toslink input. There's also a Bluetooth input. But as usual, the manufacturer goes on to talk about how the Bluetooth input supports high res, and it doesn't. I've said this so many times. I get tired of reading this. There is no Bluetooth protocol or connection on the planet that can support high res audio without throwing information away. Because our home networks, when we stream high res audio, throws nothing away. And that's what we use as our benchmark for our high res audio experience, right? 24.192 file leaves the streamer, arrives in our DAC pretty much unscathed unless something weird's going on, but those are edge cases. But in a Bluetooth connection, shit has to get thrown away because it's got to fit down a much smaller data pipe. So it kind of annoys me when when manufacturers say that this product does high-res Bluetooth. But this speaks to a larger grumble that I have, really, is the way that a lot of press releases that you and I get, Srajan, they dress up. They're almost like promo puff pieces, right? So they'll talk about unparalleled performance. I think you've mentioned this before. And that's all the shit that I've got to take out because I'm not putting that. Now, I did raise this with a PR person I deal with in the UK, and he said, well, it's because I'm sending this out not just to people who are writing news stories, but also reviewers. But I'm thinking, well, the reviewer doesn't need this either. Doesn't need the puffery. The reviewer just wants the information. Because if he's regurgitating the puffery, well, he's not really doing his job properly.
Right.
So I've got to say this. I don't want any, in an ideal world, if I ruled the world, obviously I don't, and I'm not a PR person, so maybe there's something I'm not seeing here, but if I ruled the world, there would be no puffery in any press release. It would be, here's what it is, here's what it looks like, here's what it does, here are some basic specs. Some manufacturers do this. They give us a little bulleted list, and I generally hone in on the bulleted list and then scan the text to see what other stuff I need to add in case there's extra information there. But invariably there's not. But there are some good. PS Audio used to write really good press releases that were not too thick. And also the guys that look after JBL in the UK, the press releases aren't overdone. It's like 4 paragraphs. But I know that, I'm sorry, Tim Bowen, if I'm calling you out on this, but like Tim Bowen, who looks after IAG, so your Wharfdales, your Quads, 4 or 5 pages. This is a lot to get through, Tim. And he's the guy that told me, like, I do this because it's got to go out to different people. But anyway, so those are what I call overcooked press releases. The Q Acoustics was a bit different because they were overcooking the specs. Now, let's come to an undercooked press release. This is by a little-known brand from the UK whose gear I've not heard since I first started reviewing hi-fi. I did an amplifier of theirs. In the first year of operation, I bought it all the way from the UK and had it sent to Australia just so I could write about it, but also because I wanted to hear it. The company is called Exposure. Mm-hmm. I see Exposure, I don't mean to slight them by calling them this is a compliment, actually, is their name for people who can't afford name. I think they make really good, solid, physically solid and solid sounding equipment, but they've got a new CD player out, right? Mm-hmm. And it's called the 3510. And it looks like any other CD player, although this one is a top loader. So I think there's a slide drawer and you put the disc in and you put a puck on top and slide the drawer back. I prefer that to a slide out drawer and certainly to a slot, but that's my personal preference. On the back, you've got analog outputs, you've got digital outputs, the Tosling and coax, so nothing unusual there. The press release makes mention of fully discrete output stage, which is great for some people who want no op amps, they just want discrete components. There's a big toroidal transformer inside, apparently, as well. But here's where it gets really interesting. They just sort of blew past this in the press release. I thought, no, you should be making more of a deal about this. In the press release, it says it uses, for the DAC section, PCM 1704 DAC chips. Oh. Now, I didn't notice this when I first wrote about it. One of my readers emailed me and go, do you realize what this is? And I went back and went, oh, yeah, holy shit. So these PCM 1704 DAC chips, as far as I'm aware, are R2R DAC chips. Yes. They were the last well-known R2R DAC chips made. And I think stocks have been dwindling for years. I've not seen a DAC with those DAC chips in them for years.
Me neither.
I know that Audio GD used to use them a lot in their DACs in about 2011, 2012, but their stocks ran out, so they had to cut over to, I think they went to Sabre. So you almost never see. So maybe Exposure had a box full of these chips. So this is very unusual. I think they should have made more of a deal about what DAC chips are inside. I know I always say, but it's not just the DAC chip, it's the output stage and the power supply. It is. But I've never heard a DAC with a PCM 1704 chip in it that I didn't like. And I don't think I could say that about many other DAC chips. So if you're an R2R devotee, this could be the CD player for you. It's and I did double check with Exposure. I emailed them yesterday and going, just to confirm, 1704 DAC chips, right? So unless there's another kind of 1704 DAC chip that's come out, maybe there is, maybe I'm missing something again, but I don't think so. £2,500 British pounds for this thing. Man, I was so tempted to get one. I mean, buy one, but I've got CD players coming out the wazoo, so I don't really need another. But I just thought this was really interesting, and I thought they could have, if it is the PCM 1704 that I think it is, their press people could have made more of a big deal about that. But
I would agree.
If I'm wrong, I'm going to look like an idiot here, right? But 1704. But anyway, I just thought that was really interesting, an undercooked press release.
Okay, my final item is from a small American company called Sublime Acoustic. And they just introduced a new active crossover.
Okay.
And it can be used as a 2 or as a 3-way crossover. And it's got 1 each analog input on RCA and XLR. And it's got 3 each outputs on RCA and XLR.
Okay.
So you can create a 3-way crossover with that, or a 2-way crossover, active crossover, all discrete components, analog, not digital.
Could you use this, therefore, to cross over a stand mount to a subwoofer?
That's exactly why I want to talk about this.
Right. Okay. Because 3-way is a bit esoteric, but yeah.
Because you and I have talked about the joys of subwoofing with a small speaker when the small speaker and the sub are properly integrated. And we've talked about the high pass and the low pass and how taking bass out of the small speaker will make it perform better. And we've also said that in order to do that, you need an active crossover. And the most convenient way is for that crossover to be embedded in DSP and have it show up in something like a Blue Sound or an NAD or a Lingdorf.
Yes.
Now, what if you don't have one of them? What if you have just a preamp and a power amp, and now you want to add a subwoofer, cross it over actively, and generate a high pass to your main speaker? The market for analog active crossovers has been pretty slim, and the ones that do exist can be 3, 4, 5, 6,000 euros and up. This Sublime sells for $1,200 when it eventually is fully established, and there is an early bird special for $899.
Interesting.
And now here's the interesting thing, is that it does not use variable filters. It uses cards. It uses small plug-in cards. So it has a removable lid on the top. You unscrew the thing, and you have slots. And you order these cards. I believe they're $10 or $11 each. And so you order the low pass and the high pass value that you want. I believe you can start out at 30 hertz. You can add in 5 hertz increments up to maybe 100 or 110. Then you go to 10 hertz increments. You can go all the way up to 16 kilohertz, which for our purposes is irrelevant because we're talking about a subwoofer. This is for somebody generating a tweeter high pass.
So where would this sit? Like, let's say I've got a 2-way stand mount with a normal integrated amplifier, right? And then I buy a sub. No,
the integrated amplifier could be an issue.
Okay.
Because you would need a pre-out and a main-in loop.
Okay.
Right?
So would I need a pre-power?
You would want a pre-power.
And it sits between the pre and the power.
Exactly. So you
that's
have your pre. The pre goes out XLR or RCA into the device.
Okay.
Then out of the device's high pass. XLR or RCA, you go into your amp. And then out of the subwoofer low pass, you go into the subwoofer amplifier or the subwoofer directly if it's active.
Gotcha. Okay. So really,
and now the thing you can also do, obviously you have gain controls on the front. They are believed from -9 dB to +8 for each of the individual legs. So you can control the sub and the monitor balance independently. You also have a baffle step correction, which in this discussion, we won't need. And as you order the values for your high and your low pass, they don't have to be the same. For example, if you have a 70 hertz room mode that you know about,
yes,
you could order the low pass to your subwoofer at 60 hertz and the high pass to your tweeter at 80 hertz. You create a deliberate hole which sits smack in the middle of your room mode, and you will, by default, not set up without doing anything whatsoever. Now, I reviewed and bought the original version of this, which was smaller and did not have the XLR connections at all. And it is very well built, and it's super easy to use. And this is now the new and improved version with RCA and XLR inputs and outputs. At $899 for the introductory price.
It's pretty good.
Yes. And it's like one rack space tall, and it comes with rack ears or none. And it's only black, so it's not very big. I currently don't know of anything else with that functionality
I don't either.
For that price.
I mean, that's really keen pricing. I think I remember reading your review of the previous version. I remember the bit about slot-in cards. But is this a pro-targeted device or no?
I don't believe so. I mean, Behringer would be. And there's another company whose name I currently, right now, I can't remember, that would also focus on active crossovers for the pro audio market. I believe this is more aimed, or at least also aimed at consumers, because that's how I ended up getting the press release just a few days ago.
This is big, actually. I mean, I guess the only catch is having to have a pre-power rather than an integrated, or your integrated needs to be able to
have a pre-out main in. They usually these bumpers in the back.
Yeah, that's the old school way of doing it. I mean,
or a tape loop. You could insert it into a tape loop.
Yeah, but the Audio Lab integrated that I have here still, you can use it as a pre or as a power amp, but I don't think you could engage both modes simultaneously. I don't think. And go pre-out and then back into the power amp.
No, then you would need a variable gain source.
Yes.
So you control the gain, the volume in your source.
So sorry.
Then you use the crossover, and then you go out into your integrated that you've converted into a power amp.
So I could use the Audio Lab in power amp mode, and then behind me, I was hoping to segue into this. This is a nice little. I've got two streaming DACs that work as volume control DACs behind me. I've got the Eversolo DMP88, so the bigger one, the 2 gram one, and I've also got the new Cambridge Audio CXN100. I don't very often use the volume controls, but I think I will for the reviews of those, because I'm going to go into a little Mytek Brooklyn Plus power amp just so I can test the volume control. So that kind of situation would also be very good for this particular product. I don't have time to review this Sublime. I wish I did, because this sounds fascinating, but I'm glad that you brought it to our attention, Srajan, because I know a lot of the audience here will be very much into this. And if they didn't listen this far into the podcast or watch this far, then tough shit to them. I mean, we're only 120, we're talking about an hour and 20 in. So, yeah, this is a payoff for sticking out to the end, right?
I guess now we better call it a day, right?
I think we should. Well, Srajan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John.